Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Torres Dwyer, and here's with me. Oh, no, wait a minute. I'm alone today. But very keen to be accompanied by Celso Borges today, who joins us from Pepsico, where he's heading up the e-commerce agenda in Europe. And before we start the conversation with him about accelerating e-commerce in the old continent and his career, which had an unusual start, want to thank everyone for following us. We've just reached 9,000 followers on our LinkedIn community. So getting close to 10,000, which obviously puts a smile on my face. And obviously Christina and Efrain, my co-hosts, are also very happy about it. Want to thank also the CPG Guys, our sister podcast in the US, for helping us along in this journey. And look forward to more and better content in the next few months. If you ever have any feedback, or you want to come on the show, or you want a friend or somebody that you know to come on the show, feel free to contact us. You can reach us on LinkedIn or on our contact page on the website. I think you can also now message us via our LinkedIn page, which is something that just arrived this week. So feel free to contact us any way you can. Well, without further ado, introducing Celso Borges, very keen to hear about how he's accelerating e-commerce with Pepsico. Thanks for joining. Also good to have a voice coming from LATAM, specifically Brazil, on the show. We need more of those voices, so very interested to hear more about that. Thanks for joining.
Absolutely. And yes, and I was thinking about that, right? Being Brazilian I joke around, Daniel, I think you know that, right? I'm half Portuguese, half Japanese, but 100% Brazilian, right?
Well, yeah, you can't. Once Brazil, like if you're born in Brazil, you're deemed to be a Brazilian, like in terms of like feeling very Brazilian, right?
Absolutely.
But actually, later after the show, I may ask you for referrals for the podcast from Brazil. But being from LATAM is not the only out of the usual thing that you bring to the table. One thing that really called my attention when we first spoke, Celso, was the fact that you have a very different start to your career than other people do.
Yeah.
Because you started in the startup world, right? How did that go?
Yes. So, no, absolutely. So starting out my career, fresh out of college, Daniel, I was on the camp of trying to learn as much as I could and bring as much impact as I could, right? And I figured a smaller company would allow me more freedom to do so, right? So that's what motivated me to go after, smaller companies and more on the entrepreneurial side of things, right? Yeah. It was such a blast, right? Starting something from scratch, really, and later you have something where there was nothing. It's really an exhilarating experience, right? Building a business on Excel and then realizing everything on that Excel went wrong or sideways in a sense is also, one could argue, a character building experience, right? But really it's a big learning in the sense of agility, right? And resilience even, right? So I think it was a blast, that period of my career, right? And doing so many different things, right?
Yeah. What did you do specifically? Like, what startups were you?
Yeah, so I work. It's a number of things, right? So I worked on an e-commerce startup, for instance, and
we're talking about what year, more or less?
That was precisely on the .com bubble burst.
Wow.
So 2000.
And in Brazil. Which is still considered to be underdeveloped in e-commerce, right? So
yes, exactly. So it was literally ahead of its time, right?
Probably 30 years ahead of its time or something like that.
More or less. So we jumped the gun a little bit there. But that was one example. Another example was a retail startup, actually, right? So we were trying to leverage the newsstands channel in Brazil. Brazil has over 30,000 newsstands, so it's a massive distribution network, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to bring more value-added products to the newsstands. That was a very interesting one. We set up a telecom operator, right? A mobile telecom operator when the market was open. So, the government started to open, they slice and dice the country for the mega incumbents. Mm-hmm. Then after a while, after a window for them to explore the market, they opened the market, right? And that's when we launched a small telecom operator there. So really a little bit of everything, right? And from A to Z as well on the business case design, fundraising, and operating the startups, right? So it's really how it goes, right, on startup world. I don't know, did you worked on a startup before or?
Well, I've started my own company, but it's not really a startup in the way that I haven't required like external funding and this like fast growth that startups aspire to, and it's kind of like why they're born. But tell us why you left the startup world and how you went into corporate.
Yeah, so after a while, if I'm honest, right, my motivation is my traditional joke when asked about this is I wanted to become a millionaire at a young age and I failed miserably, right? So after a few strikeouts, if you will, I started getting a bit anxious, right, of what to do with my career. And then came an opportunity to join Accenture, right? So it's a big household name, the biggest consulting firm in the world, I guess. So I went, right? I did a process there and I became a strategy consultant. And the strategy consulting career is very structured, right? Then I'm sure you're familiar with this. So you know exactly what you need to do and more or less how long it takes to reach the next step. And the structured way of working was very appealing for me at the time, right? Since I was on the opposite extreme of that, right? Of complete ambiguity and uncertainty. So I went, right? And it was a blast to work there as well. I love learning. So consulting is a massive learning that you get, right? It's a matrix of learning. Yeah. This vertical, all these industries, different industries, right? And all these business dimensions.
Yeah. And it's a great way to get familiarized also, with the companies in a certain industry, no? Because you get to know ways of working, business models, categories, cultures. It's
absolutely
a lot of, I mean, a few of the guests that we've had on the show, which are senior, started in consulting. So.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, you're absolutely right, because you're on this task force environment all the time. Yeah. So you need to get deeply immersed on the business, and you got to learn it pretty fast to be able to add value to the customer, right, to the client. So yes, it was as I said, right, I love learning. So it was a massive learning experience there.
Yeah. So I know that you were in Accenture for a number of years, and then you actually joined. Then that time, yes, you joined the FMCG industry, but you actually joined consumer electronics first, right?
Yeah. So to your point, I started working with my I would say most of my projects on consulting were for FMCGs, right? So beer companies, food companies. But you're right. My migration to the industry was to Samsung Electronics, where I became the strategy guy there. I don't know if there's a strategy guys podcast, but that's where I felt was the easier migration, right? I could tap into a lot of skills from the consulting world. So I did that for a while, and then I shifted to consumer goods, to more fast-moving consumer goods at J&J, right? That now spun off the consumer business, right? Now it's Kenvue.
It is.
The name of the consumer business.
Right? Exactly.
And so I was there. I started as the strategy guy as well, but I started to play with more commercial capabilities there at J&J, right? With in market intelligence and revenue management then. That's where from revenue management I moved fully to FMCG, if you will, with Pepsico, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you did a revenue management role, and now You went into e-commerce for the last 3 years. What drove you into e-commerce in the first time? And also it was a big transition for you, because not only you went into e-commerce, but you also from Sao Paulo to Geneva.
Yes.
In the middle of COVID in 2020, by the way.
Yes. Oh man, it's funny you should mention that, right? We when we were at the airport, it was so empty, right? It was really one of those apocalyptic type of movies, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like no one in customs, no one in security. It was a bit scary, to be honest. But yeah, so it was just a great opportunity, right? As I told you, after a while doing strategy, I wanted to get more commercial. And revenue management is quite commercial at Pepsico, actually, right? It's really on the heart of the business, you know, price architecture, mix. These are all very important day-to-day discussions we have, right, on all the channels. But then I had the opportunity to actually lead a full channel, a sizable channel here in Europe. And it was just, to me, it was a no-brainer, right? Be able to lead that in Europe. And then, of course, Geneva is not a shabby location, right, Daniel? I don't know if you've been, but it's a beautiful city, right? I'm enjoying very much living here.
Efrain, you deal with a lot of data in your job. And in this time of omnicommerce, do you sometimes find yourself really not sure with what actions to take?
Absolutely. I think as the amount of e-com performance data only continues to grow, a lot of brands are going to face this challenge.
Well, you should check Commerce IQ. They're a pioneer that are helping consumer brands win in e-commerce by optimizing digital shelf and helping grow market share by driving real-time incrementality for retail media and maximizing Amazon sales, share, and profit.
Sounds really intriguing. How can people find out more?
Well, you should join the hundreds of FMCG brands that are already winning in e-commerce with Commerce IQ. It's as easy as visiting commerceiq.ai/FMCG guys or following the link in the show notes to schedule a demo and download their free AI-powered Chrome plugin to optimize your Amazon listings. Don't miss out. Take action today to unlock your AI-powered e-commerce success with Commerce IQ. How has it been? Like, what are the key things that you had to learn when you went into your new role? What were like the main learning curves for you? Also for other people that are maybe thinking of going into a digital role.
Yeah. I think that's where my startup background helped a lot, right? Because one thing that's extremely important in digital is learning agility, right? It's really an agile mindset in the sense that test and learn, fail fast, iterate and move on, right? Fail fast and small, I might add, right? No one likes a big failure. But as long as you're failing small and learning a lot, iterating quickly and moving on, that's great for the startup world, but definitely even more so for digital, right? In any way, shape, or form. And it's so much easier, right? So test and learn in digital. So I think that's a massive, that's an extremely important dimension, right? So digital, the agility in mindset. The other is this hunger for learning, right? As I mentioned to you before, I always liked learning. I liked studying. One might throw in a nerd or geek term here and there, right, about me, but I guess I am a bit of both. But really, if you're passionate about learning, the learning never stops, right? The evolution of tech is so fast.
Yeah.
And so furious, right? That a quick example that comes to mind, we just had, I'm 3 years here, we have built this content automation capability or semi-automation capability. So you can build, a dozen assets, creative assets, whereas you would take, before you could create only one asset in the same time. Now you can create probably a dozen. And we're now talking about, wow, this is obsolete already, right? Because there are all these Gen I creative automation solutions popping in, right? So it's really, you gotta keep learning, otherwise you're gonna be left behind, right? So I think that this hunger for learning is crucial as well.
Yeah. So basically, like, you need agility and also learning. You have to have a type of vocation to learn as well.
Yeah.
No? Because if not, you're not going to be able to keep up, because you need to take the time.
Yeah.
What is your current scope? Like, how would you define your scope? Because we know that, like, sometimes with local, global, regional, there's different, like, parameters that you have. How do you define that?
Yes, absolutely. So I look over, I run e-commerce across the entire region, right? So full Europe, full European scope. But then, of course, we have markets that are more important than others, right? So the big ones for us are UK, Russia, France, Turkey. Those are all big, important markets for us, right? But my scope is the entire region, and it's really focused on the commercial areas. So I'm responsible for the sales, of course, the growth of sales, but also e-com marketing, digital merchandising, and also the capability side, right? So marketing automation, as I was talking about, but also data and tech, right? So all of our capabilities around data analytics and automation of intelligence and whatnot, they sit under my remit.
Got it. And then you must, like, partner with the global team and with the local teams as well, no?
Absolutely. So global helps us a lot on the capability side of things, right?
Yeah.
As you know, Pepsico has a massive operation in the US, so the US has more critical mass. So a lot of things we bring to Europe, we import from them, right?
Oh, really?
Trying not to reinvent the wheel as much as we can.
Yeah.
But also, of course, we're mindful of some needs for customization here, localization and stuff, right? And then with the business units, it's a day-to-day partnership on the sales side, right? So I have a lot of colleagues on the BU e-com teams, right? And we work very much like one big team, right? So that's our mantra, to try and make e-com one big team, because we are still the smallest channel for Pepsico, so we need to pool our resources to try and get strength in numbers, right?
No, because PepsiCo, of course, when we think about channels, as an FMCG company, one could think, the supermarket channel, the convenience channel, but of course, PepsiCo also has a huge out-of-home footprint, right?
Yeah.
Which sometimes you kind of forget about, but obviously it's a very big one, and it plays also in this, if you like, power struggle between categories. No, which at the end you're the same company, so you all want to sell more together, right?
Absolutely.
But obviously there's resources that need to be allocated in one place or the other, and food.
Yeah.
PepsiCo does have that nuance specifically.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Our big channels, traditional channels, right, are our biggest channels. So the organized trade, as we call it, as you said, those big supermarkets.
Yeah.
And the traditional trade, right? So the mom and pop stores. We really go down the streets to service thousands of stores, right? Directly, depending on the market. So those are the biggest channels for us, for sure.
Yeah, and through really, like, traditionally, I think for a company like PepsiCo, the out-of-home channel and the convenience or mom and pop store channel was how you came in contact with the first-time customers, no? Because supermarket is more like a repeat purchase, bigger purchase of customers that are already loyalized, I believe.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a different shopping trip, I would say, right? For different channels. Typically, the big supermarkets are the monthly big grocery purchase, right? And the more traditional, the more out-of-home channels, as you're calling them, are different shopping missions, right? So top up or convenience, and then e-com, of course, we have all of them there as well, right? Because the .com operations are really, they kind of emulate the shopping cart of the offline banner. You know what I mean? So it's a monthly type of a big purchase, a big basket. And then if you go to the rapid delivery guys, it's really a convenience basket. which is good for us actually because we grow in importance, right? Being a highly impulsive item on the basket, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, these are all like moving pieces that have already also changed a lot in the last 3 years since you joined. Like, if you look back, what are the main topics that you focused on in your role? What are been the main priorities on your table in this time period?
Yeah. So when I was first starting, we did an exercise to try and define our mission, right? What are we here for? What is the problem we're solving for the organization? And we came up with two big, very ambitious statements, right? But is delivering outrageous growth, which is we gotta grow at a rate that is not usual for the traditional channels, right? And that's why we used deliberately the word outrageous, right? It's a growth pace that they can't match. So that was the big one. And the second big statement was developing differentiating capabilities, right? Differentiating meaning we can beat the market today and tomorrow by developing those capabilities, right? And the way we went about the capability side of the equation was talent first and foremost. So we knew we needed expert talent for expert functions, so data and tech, for instance, performance marketing, and so on and so forth. But we also knew for things to work in a big company like Pepsico, we needed folks that knew how Pepsico works, right? Know the corporate culture, know the unspoken rules of the business, if you know what I mean, right?
The culture. Ultimately, culture is about understanding the unspoken rules up to a point, no?
Exactly. So we knew we needed a mix, and we went in a deliberate manner about building the team, right, and building the talent. So we elevated seniority, we grew the team, we elevated seniority, and we elevated expertise. So that was first a pillar of our strategy. Then the other was ways of working, right? Really processes, governance, KPIs, getting a bit more disciplined about the way we ran e-com in the region, right? So I think my predecessor did an amazing job of starting up the business, and then we needed to scale it up in a more structured manner, I would say, right? We started to be too big to be a startup, so we needed to establish a few more ways of working, more structured ways of working. So that was a second massive pillar.
And when you talk about ways of working, like what does that actually mean? I don't know if there's some example that you can give us of something that actually changed, or the way that you're working currently that's actually being successful, because I think that a lot of our listeners will find they have a challenge. Of course, they want to create like a global or centralized or regionalized structure because it makes sense to have a center of excellence. But how do you work then with the BUs, and how does this actually work for you guys?
Yeah. So let me give you an example or a couple of examples there, right? I think one very illustrative one is the P&L management, right? So we didn't have a ritual to check on the P&L of the channel in a structured manner. And to be honest, the numbers that we had on the system were allocations, right? And then each and every BU would go about allocating it on their own ways, right? So we did a piece of work to structure and allocate the P&L in a similar manner, and also a parallel established in parallel a ritual of reviewing the P&L periodically, right? So that we could check, okay, so the top line is working, but the bottom line is also working, right? And I think that's a good way of illustrating that.
Yeah. So having like a common approach to like how do you measure e-commerce, no, in some way.
Yeah.
Now everybody's talking about standardization now, so I think
yes, and that's you know, big corporations are crazy about standardizing as much as they can, right?
Yeah.
So, but it was really it's always a business, right? It's fun and digital to a certain extent, because it's e-com, but it's gotta show it has the ROI. To your point, right, on resourcing allocation earlier, we gotta make our business case work to get the resources we need to build the capabilities to keep winning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the final pillar was tech, right? So we really invested on developing the data and tech team and to import these tools, as I mentioned to you, from the US team, but also building our own tools or adapting the tools that we got from them, right? So there was a step change on the tech as well.
Ah, cool. And then like this all came together, and what do you see like as the kind of next frontier for e-commerce? Like once all this is in place, I don't know if there's anything that you can advance or things that you think you'll be working on in the next couple of years.
There's a couple of things, right? So one I mentioned already, right? So Gen AI is a buzz, right? There's all this buzz, and everyone is talking about it and thinking about it on how we can leverage that, right, to our business. So of course we're thinking about content creation and automation, as I told you, but also in marketing in general, right? What else can we do there to help us accelerate the business? Personalization at scale are things that we're talking a lot about. Direct to consumer, right? Not only on establishing, brand.com stores, but more important than that, establishing a direct to consumer dialogue, right? So really understanding the consumer and getting data enough to establish this relationship with the consumer, which is very new for CPGs. In a sense, right, Daniel? Because we're more often than not, big CPGs are more transactional with the consumer. You know what I mean? They go to the grocery shop, they buy our stuff, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
And this dialogue implies capabilities, even a way of thinking that we're not that used to, right? It's from this transactional relationship to a lifetime value type of relationship. So we're trying to push that discussion as well. And then, of course, retail media networks, right, is something that is hot on our minds right now. As you know, e-commerce was always a mix, right? It's a channel, but it's also a media, right from its inception, I would say. But now with the big retailers entering here in Europe on the media market, this is getting more traction, right? So I really think this could help e-commerce in general grow faster, right, and accelerate further.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that the retail media thing, it started felt like it was a bit of a buzzword at first.
Yeah.
I have to be honest, but it's clearly taken over as one of the main topics. And if 12 months ago, no CEO would have been talking about retail media.
Yeah.
We didn't even know what retail media was. Yeah. Now they definitely need to know about it because it's just becoming a huge way of connecting with consumers or building your brand, selling. Yep. There's so many dimensions to it. And it also goes a bit like what you were saying, hand in hand with the whole digitalization trend. So it's something that cannot be avoided. It also goes hand in hand with the fact of e-commerce. Before it was just about being there. And now it's being there, how you show up, having the right data, having the right quality.
It's about winning there.
If you're not on the first page, you don't exist practically, right? So it all comes together. Yeah. I mean, retail media is just acting like a catalyst.
And this new trend, as you said, right? It's a big wave of retail media networks' attention, but there's this new factoid that just popped up, right? With Amazon and Meta, right? So this, I think this is big as well, right? Shoppable media coupled with retail media networks. Yeah. This could mean every retailer or every media could become its own closed loop, right? So I think it's a big potential catalyst, right, for the whole e-com channel.
Yeah. By the way, I wanted to ask you, looking back home in Brazil, I don't know if you want to say Brazil or Latin America, how do you see e-commerce evolving in that part of the world?
Yeah, so it's, as you say, right, it's surprisingly small, right? Because as I told you, we were doing this 20 years ago, right? This startup that I mentioned, which was already a copycat of a big local player that was sort of a Brazilian Amazon version, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's surprisingly small because of that, because it started a while back, but also because Brazilians are very digital savvy, right? So I think it's one of the highest adoptions of mobile banking in the world.
Wow.
They have 2 mobiles per head or something like that on average. So there's this
2 per
paradox.
head.
Huh?
2 per person.
Yeah, I think so. And this is an old factoid, right? This is not even a fresh one. It's before I moved here. So there's a bit of a paradox there of digital savviness versus e-com adoption. Well, or maybe I'm biased because it's e-com adoption for food and bev, right? Which is what I follow more closely.
Yeah.
So and food and bev is a laggard, right? In terms of categories for e-com in general, as you know, Daniel. So yeah, so I don't know. It's a little puzzling, and at the same time there were these startups in Brazil that were so good, right? So iFood, I don't know if you heard of them, but it's a food aggregator. They were huge in Brazil, right? But again, I may be biased by living in São Paulo, right, where a lot of consumption power potential is concentrated, and a lot of the startups happen in São Paulo, right, in Brazil. Yeah. So they were ubiquitous there. And all this type of stuff. So you know Getir, right? You're familiar with Getir, the quick commerce player. They are a great partner to us, by the way. But they in Brazil they had a Getir like I don't know 5 years back or something already, right? When Getir was starting to boom in Turkey, there was a Brazilian version of it already in Brazil as well. So really, I don't know. I feel like they're at the same time advanced on a few experiments, but delayed on broader adoption. It may have to do with social inequality, right? You know, Brazil is a very socially unjust country, right? Yeah. There's a lot of wealth concentration on a very small percentage. So
we had an episode maybe a year and a half ago with a guy called Bruno Cinelato. At the time worked at Via, the electronics retailer in Brazil, and he talked a lot about like the nuances and the challenges of doing e-commerce there. So I'll add that link in the show notes if the listeners want to learn.
Yeah, that's a good follow.
It's a good one.
I don't know if I answered your question or if I confused you only, but
you did. One other thing that I wanted to ask you that we referred to before is the fact that you started in startups, but then you were a consultant that went into the industry, and you took the typical route of going from consulting into the strategy function. Yeah. But then you moved into commercial, and that's obviously something that's a challenge, right? When you have like that consultant badge on you to move into like people management, P&L management, etc. How have you been able to make that shift?
I think there's a bit of playing to strength, right? So, of course, I leveraged my strategic thinking skills to showcase how I could add value to the business and to discussions as well. But also a bit of sponsorship, right? Of my previous boss, my hiring manager that brought me here to Europe. He took a bet on me to a certain extent, right? And to have a different profile to run a channel. So I think it was a combination of both, right? At the same time, I will always be grateful to the strategy days because I always have a framework for everything now, right? I feel like this you're trained, right, on these problem-solving methodologies and tools. So I use them every day, I would say, right? So I will always be grateful to the strategy days for that. So that's one thing, but also, of course, be grateful for the opportunities you get, right? For the sponsors that you get as well along the way.
Yeah. And thinking back in your career, like if you went to the very beginning of it, and this is a question that we ask all our guests.
Yeah.
If there was one piece of advice you could give yourself with everything you've learned, what would that be?
Just the one.
Just the one.
Just the one. All right. So I think we put ourselves through unnecessary stress more often than not. So I would advise my younger self to enjoy the ride a bit more. I think I stressed myself out a little too much and I still do, to be honest, Daniel. Sometimes I think I I stress myself out too much. So it's really about enjoying the ride, right? I think that would be, if it's just the one, that would be the one.
This was Celso Borges, VP and Head of eCommerce Europe at Pepsico. First time we had somebody from PepsiCo on the show, so I think Celso really delivered to the expectation. Really liked the fact that he started his job, his work experience in the startup world, having successes but also many failures, which is always a good reminder. I also like the fact that he then went to consulting, which is a great career foundation because, as we mentioned, you learn how a lot of companies work, get a lot of different experiences. And now, managing e-commerce at PepsiCo, very interesting segment. The food sector is one of a kind, as we mentioned. It's not only about grocery, it's also about the out-of-home, QSR channels, which also super important. And he talked about developing different capabilities in his time there. So around talent, tech, but also ways of working, which these soft parts are also a very important part of making e-commerce successful. And look forward as well to seeing how he develops things on Gen AI, which he's excited about, as well as retail media. So this was Celso Borges. Really enjoyed the conversation. Hope you did as well. Remember to follow us on LinkedIn. Leave us a review if you haven't yet. And we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys. Have a great day.